When the church doors opened, my daughter turned pale before the music even started. Not because she saw me. She had expected that. Maybe feared it. Maybe even hated me for coming after she begged me not to. No, her face changed because of the woman walking beside me, her grandmother. The woman she had been told was dead for 22 years. My name is Samuel Whitaker. I am 67 years old, a retired school mechanic, a widower, and the kind of man people forget is still standing in the room until something breaks. My daughter Elise called me 3 weeks before her wedding. I was in my garage, rebuilding the carburetor on an old riding mower for a neighbor, when my phone rang. Her name lit up the screen, and for one foolish second, I smiled like a man who had forgotten how much a voice could hurt him. "Dad," she said. Just that. Not Daddy, like when she was little. Not Pop, like she used to call me after her mother died. Dad. Careful, formal, distant. "Hi, sweetheart." There was a pause. Then she took a breath so sharp I knew she had rehearsed what came next. "I need to ask you something, and I don't want you to make it harder than it already is." I set the wrench down slowly. "Okay, please don't come to the wedding." For a moment, the garage went quiet. Even the old radio on the shelf seemed to fade into static. I looked at the framed photo above my workbench. Elise, at 8 years old, missing 2 front teeth, sitting on my shoulders at the county fair. Her mother, Laura, had taken that picture, back when our little family still felt unbreakable. I swallowed. "Is that what you want?" Another pause. "It's what's best." Those words told me someone else had helped write the sentence. "What does Mark think?" I asked. Her voice tightened. "Mark has been there for me, Dad. Mark Reynolds, her stepfather, the man who entered her life after Laura died, wearing polished shoes, carrying flowers, speaking softly to grieving people, and slowly teaching my daughter to see me as something small, unreliable, embarrassing, a reminder of pain." Elise continued, "Faster now. He's walking me down the aisle. It would just be awkward if you were there. People would ask questions." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because I had spent 22 years being the answer nobody wanted to ask about. I had paid hospital bills, sold my truck, worked 2 jobs, missed sleep, missed meals, missed pieces of myself trying to keep Elise's life steady after cancer took her mother. And somehow, over the years, Mark became the hero of the story. I became the old man in the background. "Sweetheart," I said quietly, "I'm your father." Her voice broke then, but only for a second. "Then please act like it and let me have one perfect day." That sentence did what anger never could. It silenced me. So I said the only thing I could. "All right, Elise." She exhaled, like I had finally done something useful. "Thank you." But before she hung up, I heard Mark's voice in the background. "See? Told you he'd back down." And that was the moment I knew my daughter's perfect day had been built on a lie. For 3 days after that call, I did exactly what Elise expected me to do. I stayed quiet. I did not call her back. I did not beg. I did not drive across town and demand to know when my daughter had decided the man who raised her no longer deserved a seat in the church. I went to work in my garage. I fixed Mrs. Callahan's mower, changed the oil in my old pickup, swept sawdust from a floor that had been swept clean already. Men of my generation were taught to keep our pain useful, so I turned mine into chores. But that voice would not leave my head. "Told you he'd back down." Mark had said it casually, like he already knew the shape of my spine, like I was a man who had spent his whole life surrendering. Maybe he had reason to think that. I had surrendered before. When Laura got sick, I surrendered sleep. I surrendered pride. I surrendered every extra dollar I had to hospitals and medicine and specialists who used gentle voices when there was no more hope left. After she died, I surrendered my anger, because Elise was 12 and watching me too closely. I did not want my grief to become the weather she had to live under. Then Mark arrived. He was Laura's old friend from church. At least, that was what everyone said. He brought casseroles, fixed a leaky faucet, drove Elise to youth group when I was working late. People praised him for stepping up. At first, I was grateful. A widower with grease under his fingernails learns to accept help, even from men he does not fully trust. But help slowly became presence. Presence became influence. Influence became ownership. By the time Elise was 16, Mark was correcting her memories. "Your father was barely home back then," he would say gently. He did his best, but he was overwhelmed. I would look at Elise, waiting for her to remember the lunches I packed, the math homework at midnight, the nights I slept in a chair outside her bedroom because she was afraid of thunderstorms after the funeral. But memory is fragile when someone polishes the wrong version often enough. At graduation, Mark sat in the front row while I stood in the back because he said there were only so many good seats. At her college move-in, he carried one box for every 3 I carried, then told everyone later how hard the day had been on him. And I let it happen. Not because I was weak, because every time I pushed back, Elise pulled farther away. So I learned to lose quietly, if losing meant I could still see my daughter on holidays. But after that phone call, one sentence bothered me more than all the others. Not, "Don't come." Not, "Mark will walk me." Not even, "Let me have one perfect day." It was this. People would ask questions. What questions? Why would my presence at my own daughter's wedding make anyone ask anything? That Saturday, I opened the cedar chest in my bedroom for the first time in years. Inside were Laura's letters, old insurance papers, hospital records, and a sealed envelope I had promised myself I would never touch unless Elise needed the truth more than she needed peace. On the front, written in Laura's handwriting, were 3 words: "For my daughter." I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time before I opened it. And by the time I finished reading, I knew Mark had not just stolen my place at the wedding. He had stolen 22 years of the truth. Laura's letter was only 4 pages long. But 4 pages can destroy an entire life when they contain the truth, people buried under polite smiles. My hands shook as I read the first line. "Samuel, if I don't get the chance to explain this to Elise myself, promise me you will when she is old enough to understand." I had seen that envelope years earlier, tucked beneath her hospital Bible. She had made me swear not to open it while Elise was still a child. I thought she was protecting our daughter from grief. I did not know she was protecting her from Mark. Laura wrote that Mark had been helping her during the months I worked nights to pay the medical bills. He drove her to appointments when I could not, sat with her in the infusion room, brought groceries. To everyone else, he looked generous, but Laura had begun to feel uncomfortable. He asked too many questions about our marriage. He told her I was absent. He said I was hiding behind work because I could not face losing her. At first, she defended me. Then she noticed he was telling other people the same thing. Softly, carefully, like poison dropped into water. Then came the part that made me stop breathing. Mark had convinced Laura's mother, Evelyn, that I did not want her visiting. Evelyn Carter, Elise's grandmother, the woman who had helped raise Elise for the first 12 years of her life. The woman who made strawberry jam every summer and taught my daughter to braid ribbons into her hair. The woman who disappeared from our lives 3 weeks before Laura died. I had always believed Evelyn left because grief broke her. That was what Mark told everyone. Laura's letter said otherwise. It said Evelyn had come to the hospital one afternoon and argued with Mark after finding him alone in Laura's room. Laura was weak by then, drifting in and out from the medicine, but she heard enough. Evelyn accused him of trying to replace me before Laura was even gone. Mark told her she was upsetting a dying woman. Then he told hospital staff she was unstable. After that, Evelyn stopped coming. I thought she had abandoned us. She thought I had banned her from the hospital. And Elise, a grieving 12-year-old girl, had been told her grandmother could not bear to see her anymore. Years later, Mark made it worse. He told Elise that Evelyn had died. I sat on the edge of the bed with that letter in my lap, feeling 22 years rearrange themselves inside my chest. All those birthdays Evelyn missed, all those Christmas mornings, all those school plays where Elise looked into the audience and saw one less person loving her than there should have been. Not because death had taken her grandmother, because Mark Reynolds had. The next morning, I drove 2 hours to a small town outside Ashland, where the last return address on one of Evelyn's old letters led me to a white house with blue shutters and rose bushes along the fence. A woman answered the door. She was 87 now, smaller than I remembered, hair white, hands thin, but her eyes were the same. When she saw me, she grabbed the doorframe. "Samuel?" I nodded. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "Is Elise all right?" That question broke something in me. Because even after 22 years, even after believing I had kept her away, her first thought was still my daughter. I handed her Laura's letter. She read it at the kitchen table, while I sat across from her, surrounded by framed photographs I had never seen. Elise at 12, Elise at graduation, Elise's engagement picture cut from a church newsletter. Evelyn had been watching from a distance, loving from exile. When she finished, Tears slid down her face. "He told me you hated me," she said. I closed my eyes. "He told us you left." By the time I drove home that evening, I knew exactly why Mark did not want me at the wedding. It was not awkwardness, it was fear. Because if the wrong people stood in the same church, the story he had built for 22 years might finally collapse. The wedding was held the following Saturday at St. Matthew's Church, the same church where Laura and I had been married 43 years earlier. I almost did not go. Not because Elise had asked me to stay away, because part of me still wanted to protect her from the pain of the truth. That is the strange burden of being a father. Sometimes the thing your child needs most is the thing that will hurt them first. Evelyn sat beside me in the truck, wearing a pale blue dress and a string of pearls I remembered from Christmas dinners long ago. Her hands rested in her lap, folded around a small white handkerchief. "You're sure?" she asked. I looked through the windshield at the church doors. "No," she nodded. "Me neither." Inside, music floated softly through the open windows. Guests were already seated. Flowers lined the aisle. Everything looked perfect, just like Elise wanted. Perfect things can hide terrible lies. We waited until the bridal march began. That was Evelyn's idea. "If Mark wants a performance," she said quietly, "then let the truth have an entrance too." When the church doors opened, every head turned. I heard the music falter. At the front of the aisle, Elise stood in her wedding dress, one hand wrapped around her bouquet, the other resting lightly on Mark's arm. Then she saw me. Her face tightened with shock, then anger. Then her eyes moved to the woman beside me, and all the color drained from her face. Evelyn took one step forward. "Elise," she whispered. The bouquet slipped slightly in my daughter's hands. "No," Elise said. It was barely a sound. Mark moved first. He left the aisle and came toward us fast, smiling in a way only I could see was panic. "Samuel," he said through his teeth, "this is not the time." I looked at him calmly. "You're right. It should have happened 22 years ago." A murmur moved through the church. Elise stared at Evelyn like a child seeing a ghost. Mark turned toward the guests, trying to recover. "This is a confused elderly woman," he announced. "Samuel is doing this because he was upset about not being included." Evelyn's back straightened. For a moment, she was not 87. She was the woman who had once stood between grief and a little girl with ribbons in her hair. "I am not confused," she said. Her voice was soft, but the church heard every word. "I am Evelyn Carter. I am Elise's grandmother." The murmurs became gasps. Elise shook her head slowly. "My grandmother died." Evelyn looked at Mark. "No, sweetheart. I was told your father did not want me near you." Elise turned toward me. I held out Laura's letter. "She wrote it before she died," I said. "I found it after you asked me not to come." Mark's face went hard. "Do not give her that." That was the wrong thing to say. Every person in that church heard it. And more importantly, Elise heard it. She stepped away from him. "Why not?" Mark lowered his voice. "Because this is manipulation." Elise looked at the letter, then at Evelyn, then at the man who had been about to walk her down the aisle. For the first time in years, she did not ask Mark what to believe. She reached for the envelope herself. Elise opened the letter with trembling hands. Nobody in the church moved. Not the guests, not the pastor, not Ben, the man waiting at the altar, with tears already forming in his eyes. Only Mark moved, one step forward. "Give that to me," he said. Ben stepped off the altar. "Don't touch her." That stopped Mark cold. Elise read in silence. I watched her face change with every line. Confusion became disbelief. Disbelief became pain. And pain slowly became something sharper. Understanding. When she finished, she looked at Evelyn. "You came to the hospital?" Evelyn nodded, crying openly now. "Every day, sweetheart, until I was told I wasn't wanted." Elise turned to me. "And you thought she left us?" I could barely speak. "Yes." Then she looked at Mark. For 22 years that man had survived by being the voice beside her ear, the person who explained the past before anyone else could. But now the lie was standing in the middle of the church with flowers on every pew and witnesses in every seat. Mark tried one last time. "Elise, your mother was sick." She was confused. "That letter doesn't prove—" "My mother was dying," Elise said. "Not stupid." The church went silent again. Then she handed me the letter and removed her hand from Mark's arm. "You don't get to walk me anywhere." Mark's face hardened. "After everything I did for you." Evelyn took a step toward him. "No, Mark. After everything you took." The pastor quietly asked if Elise wanted to pause the ceremony. Ben came to her side and took both her hands. "We don't have to do this today," he whispered. Elise looked down the aisle, at the empty space where her father should have been, at the grandmother she thought had died, at the man who had turned grief into a throne and sat on it for half her life. Then she wiped her face. "No," she said, "I still want to get married today, but not with a lie walking me down the aisle." She looked at me. "Dad?" One word. Not formal, not distant. "Dad." I walked to her slowly, because my knees were not what they used to be, and because 22 years of pain can make even a short aisle feel like a mile. Then Elise looked at Evelyn. "Grandma?" Evelyn covered her mouth with both hands. Together, the three of us stood at the back of that church. When the music began again, I walked on one side of my daughter, and her grandmother walked on the other. Halfway down the aisle, Elise squeezed my arm and whispered, "I'm sorry." I looked at her through tears I no longer cared to hide. "You were lied to, sweetheart. That is not the same as being wrong." Mark left before the vows. No one stopped him. In the months that followed, the story spread through town the way church stories always do. Quietly at first, then everywhere. Mark resigned from the church finance committee. People stopped inviting him into rooms where trust mattered. For the first time in decades, he had to live without controlling the version everyone heard. As for Elise, healing came slowly. She spent Sundays with Evelyn. They made strawberry jam the first summer, and my daughter cried when she realized she remembered the smell. Ben framed Laura's letter and kept a copy safely tucked away, not as a wound, but as proof that love can survive even when lies interrupt it. One evening, Elise came to my garage while I was fixing an old mower. She stood in the doorway for a while before speaking. "I thought you gave up on me." I set the wrench down. "Never." "Then why did you stay so quiet?" I looked at my hands, old now, scarred from work and years I could not get back. "Because I thought if I fought Mark, I might lose you completely." She crossed the room and hugged me. "You almost did." I held her tight. "I know. That is the thing about truth. Sometimes it arrives late, sometimes it hurts before it heals, but when it finally walks through the door, every lie in the room starts looking for an exit. If you have ever been pushed out of your own family, or if someone ever twisted the truth against you, share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Samuel did the right thing by staying quiet until he had proof? If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps and encourages us to keep bringing you new stories like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.